Thank you for coming to my channel, and I want to acknowledge that currently where I'm at, I am inhabiting lands from the Dakota and Anishinaabe people, and I just wanted to take some time and acknowledge that, and also remind you that you probably are on stolen land. If you're anywhere in the Americas, you're on stolen land, and definitely do that research about who were the original people on your land, and really take time and acknowledge that, and what has happened and where we are now and how much further we need to go. Let's get back into the video. Everybody, welcome to the interview today with Dr. Inger Burnett-Zeigler. Did I say
Zeigler?
Zeigler.
Yes.
I was like, I'm gonna get that wrong for sure. So we have her here to discuss her book, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, The Emotional Lives of Black Women. Did I say that correct?
You did.
I try to say it off the cuff. I did.
Yep. Perfect.
Also, welcome to my channel, The Loc'D Booktician. Thank y'all for coming and being here. And I'm really excited to talk to her about her book. Now, before we get started, I did have a small introduction that I wanted to say and just read off of it based on some stuff I found online. So Dr. Inger Burnett-Zeigler,
Yes.
okay, is a licensed clinical psychologist and associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavior Sciences at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University. Her research and most things that she does it from a lens of looking at Black women in regards to their trauma or different type of pain or mental health issues that they may be experiencing. She's been featured in New York Times, Time Magazine, and in the Chicago Tribune. Sorry about that, cognitive slip there. And also she received her postdoctoral fellowship at VA Ann Arbor / the University of Michigan. And my friend just got his PhD there. So I'm thinking it's a good school. And she's also a Chicagoan, from Chi-Town, as they say.
That's right. Born and raised. Hardcore Southsider. That's right.
You're like, I'm gonna rep myself. That's
what we do best, us Southside Chicagoans.
You must. Every time I go somewhere, I'm like, from New Orleans.
All right.
From New Orleans uptown, that's where I'm at. Where Lil Wayne is from, that's where I'm from. Put some respect on our names, you know.
That's right.
That's what I'd be saying. I feel like my lock's trying to hate on me today, and I'm like getting hot. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about is.
Well, thank you, Bree, for having me.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you, and yeah, let's get into it.
I'm ready. I'm also like nervous and trying to like throw the nerves back somewhere. I want to say thank you for making a book that firmly established that Black women lives matter, and more importantly, that their Black mental health matters. And the fact that this book, the whole totality of the book, reads as "Sis, I see you, and this is for you."
Oh,
right. So I just kept thinking of that. And one of my favorite like colloquial phrases I use is "I feel very attacked," as a joke, is what I say. And I want to just read a little bit from page 31. And you said, "We may feel like we have to defend our competence and prove to others, and perhaps even ourselves, that we have a right to be present, seen, and heard. In response, we protect ourselves by not participating in the things that are meaningful in our lives in an attempt to avoid people, places where racism is most likely to occur." And I felt like I was crushing my invisible pearls at that. And I said, "Is she in my closet? Like, is she watching me? Like, what's happening here?" Because I live in a very small town of like 2,000 people. Most people are white. And it makes it really hard for me personally, even as a mental health provider, to engage in things that brings me joy. because going on a walk is so much effort because people are staring. They want to ask me about my hair. They
We're on the
microaggressions
defense.
happen. Huh?
We can be on the defense in those situations, waiting.
Right. I can't even like relax. My roommate is like, "Do you leave the house?" And it's like, nah, I would love to go on walks and do those things. But unfortunately, I'm very much existing, not unfortunately, but in this text, it's unfortunate that I can't exist fully as a, you know, Black woman in the town that I'm in because of all those things. So I feel like I can't even like participate, as you're saying, in the things that are meaningful in my life due to what could happen due to racism and all those different type of things. um, so I wanted to start off with a first question for you is, imagine someone watching this interview and they have never thought about considering psychotherapy or even a consult of any kind, and that person is a Black woman, because it is clear you wrote this book for Black women, um, and that is a young Black woman. How would you describe your book as like a pitch and 4 words to them?
I love how you frame that. I would describe it as a book that talks about many of the things that Black women experience and hold close that don't get talked about. And a way of building community, building relatedness among us as the community of Black women for all the things that we're afraid to say, afraid to acknowledge, afraid to show other people, and to let us know, remind me,
Right.
my friend, my sister, my mother, that many of these are common experiences. And that was one of my goals of the book. I mean, I have many goals of the book, but one of the goals of the book was to create community, because I think that the silence of our pain keeps us isolated.
Ooh, speak on that.
And so when I say something and someone, a stranger or a friend, says, I've dealt with that too, that breaks that isolation. It can maybe break some of the shame and the aloneness as well. And that's been happening. And that's like one of my greatest joys of the book, even with people you think you know, right? Because people that we believe we're and are close to, like, I don't want to minimize the closeness that we have, with various women and sisters in our lives. But there's still stuff that those close people are holding tight as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I want to go back to something you said, is the things you kind of want to shine light on, things that we don't talk about. A couple months ago, not months, it's probably 2 years now. Yeah, it's been about 2 years. Someone at my alma mater asked me to write an article to contribute to, it was like an articles that get published underneath APA, but it's like the school does it or something. And I wrote an article about the dangers of quiet as it kept in Black communities. Right?
I love that title.
The dangers of it. If you wanted, I could send it to you, but
I would love that. But that title is awesome.
It already says what it needs to be said, right? It's just like the way that we be quiet as it kept, he did that. She did this. And it's like, but why is it quiet? That's trauma.
Right. That's trauma. And that's perpetuation of trauma.
And how do we break those intergenerational curses if we don't shed light on it?
Right.
So quiet as it kept in itself is a hindrance.
Right. Yeah, and I try to touch on that in the book as well, the burden of silence.
Yes.
How silence keeps us in shame, how silence allows the perpetuation of these cycles to continue, because we don't know, we don't pass on, we don't know what our foremothers have experienced.
Right.
We don't benefit from the lessons that could be learned in their experience.
Yeah.
And it's protective, and I understand the reasons why we've kind of adopted uh this kind of standard of silence. We're trying to protect our own view of ourselves to ourselves and to others. We're trying to protect family members because often it's family members or people in our community that we're, you know, keeping quiet on behalf of.
Exactly.
Um, but it is, as you say, it is trauma, and it is, I think, a critical piece that allows these cycles to continue.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
Well said. Well said. Um, I also wanted to talk about, I've been reading a lot of books by Black women, specifically nonfiction, lately. And I want to get to this like small pile I have here, because usually when I'm reading nonfiction that has to do with mental health, I like to say, and these are some books that pair well with that, to give you like a more in depth idea on what the collective themes are in the books. And what I am coming to the realization is that when we think about intersectionality, right, and intersectional identities, that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, when we think about those things, I feel that Black women has such a natural way of being intersectional in the way we talk about ourselves. And I'm wondering what's your thoughts on that, because it's clear it's intersectional in your book. You're not saying, I'm going to look at this from an intersectional lens. It's just naturally how your book is flowing. You're talking about motherhood, that identity, also being Black, also being a woman, also being a woman of faith. It's just so many different
Mm-hmm.
identities that are intersectionally woven throughout the book, that it's just naturally doing the job and doing what and giving what it needed to have gave. That I'm wondering what's your thoughts on that natural way in which Black women talks about identities, including their own, in an
Hmm.
intersectional manner.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that we, as you say, naturally take on multiple roles slash identities. And that's kind of a part of our being, the doing it all, the showing up in these various spaces, the switching it up as necessary to be who we need to be for these different audience in various spaces.
Right.
And that's laborious, right? The switching, if need be,
Oh.
the expectations of each individual space
Hmm.
is is laborious, and yet it's kind of this an expectation of what's been passed down about what we as Black women are supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be mothers, providers, successful at work, giving in the community, leading the mother's day at church, helping out with the sisters kids, you know being in
Everybody.
your sorority or being in your sorority or your women's group. Like, we're supposed to be able to do that and it not feel heavy or not feel exhausting or stressful. Um, and so we kind of like take that on. And one of the things that I wanted to put forth in the book is, what if we released ourselves of some of these expectations of what it means to be this do it all Black woman,
Yeah.
and decided to define our existence in a way that felt healthier and more freeing and restful and
Hmm.
joyous. I like that you mentioned joy just a moment ago
Hmm.
for ourselves. Um, yeah, one of the things that I wanted to kind of to touch on is that we do have these just different layers. And sometimes those layers seem to kind of come together, and sometimes they can feel very disjointed.
Hmm.
um, Particularly when the various spaces are not working well together, like our private lives are not able to be talked about, or we have to hold secret about that in the workspace for fear of what that will mean, which is something I see a lot of kind of professional Black women dealing with.
Me, myself.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I
Yeah.
mean, so many people.
So I'd be like, am I going to show up
Right,
fully Black today?
right,
Do I have the time? That's the big thing. Do I have the time and the energy for this right now?
right, right. And it's either side, right? You show up as your fullest self, and you know, many times you're kind of weighing the consequences of that, and then there's a consequence to holding back, to code switching, to filtering.
Yeah.
Um,
And code switching is also laborious.
exactly, exactly. There's that internal dialogue, like what?
Yeah.
What's happening here?
You
Is
know,
this really happening? Yeah.
it is. It is. I mean, myself, I grew up in let's just say I grew up in the hood in New Orleans. That's
My
where.
people are from Baton Rouge, by the way.
Oh, okay, okay. Hey, cousin.
Down the street, right, right, right.
Hey, cousin. I grew up in a neighborhood where on site was on site, and we often chose violence. And sometimes in a workplace, it could be very difficult because I feel like people test your gangster quite often in higher institutions. It's constantly being tested, and you just like, it's today the day I possibly can lose my job because I've had enough. You don't have enough of everybody's stuff, and you're just like, do you not see the weight that you're piling on me?
They
Like,
don't. They
and
don't.
then, as you say, very, very clearly, I had to highlight it. I don't know if I didn't highlight. Oh yeah, I came right up on it. Look at God, came right up on it. He said, "Be an informant patient. Doing research and being prepared with questions when you visit your doctor. Never be afraid to advocate for yourself." The way I felt seen, and also it's a huge reminder, like, you need to advocate for yourself, but I also can't help to be like, what is the cost, the emotional cost of a Black woman advocating for themselves when they are one of a sea of whiteness? Like, what's the emotional cost of constantly have to be like, I matter, this is how I matter, I matter, this is again how I matter, I told you yesterday that I matter, told you last week that I matter. Now I'm exhausted on advocating for myself because the sea of whiteness is not seeing it, or the institutions that were not built for us in mind at all is totally dismissive of our experiences as a human being first.
Indeed. And what is the cost of not? I think one of the reasons why I think this advocacy for ourselves, our needs, our mental wellness, our physical wellness, our joy is so important, even with the emotional cost and the labor that can go along with that, is
Right.
because you're setting a new expectation. And I believe that a lot of that labor is on the front end, particularly if you are realigning a system, realigning what a work system in terms of how they can come for you or not.
So true.
Maybe realigning a family system
Yeah.
in terms of what they can ask of you or expect from you. And that period of realignment can be rocky. I tell my patients this all the time. When you're in therapy and you're doing the work and you're starting to think about boundaries and you're starting to think about assertive communication and you're starting to think about what you're going to tolerate and what you're not and what serves you and what you're not, that's going to change people because this is a new you.
Yeah.
They're used to an old you that perhaps serves them better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same is true in a workplace when you say, well, I can't take on this extra 10 thing that's voluntary right now.
It's always voluntary now.
It's voluntary.
It's never written in the contract.
No pay, no credit.
Nothing. You're just hanging out.
And I've heard these conversations. Ask such and such, they'll do it. They'll always do it. Sure, they'll do it. Of course, they'll do it. So yes, I agree 100%. But I think that this is necessary labor on the front end, weighted on the front end, that has long-term, that can readjust and reshift things in a healthy way for the longer term.
Yeah. Well, I said it. So there are some parts of your book where it's kind of like vignette style, but not really. Because there's no question at the end of like how you should, work with this. But you're giving us insight to your personal life and also the lives of your clients. Amber stuck with me throughout the whole situation, right? And oftentimes I tell my clients is that, look, if you're looking for therapy to go like this is not for you. Like therapy is going to be up and down. You might feel worse in the beginning, or you might feel happy next week and then sad. Like it takes some time to adjust to really looking at yourself introspectively and trying to break some of those things down and like readjust and set boundaries. And setting boundaries can be very difficult to do in Black families. I'm just saying it. It's like you doing the Olympics. I feel like all the time. Like I even like
it's foreign to many of us. It's foreign. It's a new
what's
concept.
a boundary? Never heard of her, never seen her. We don't even know where she lived. Do she live here? Like it's just so hard to set them. And I try to tell, like, especially like my BIPOC students, is that setting boundaries is about being consistent and constantly saying it, because the moment you let up on them boundaries, it's like going back to square one. It's like you get good. You're like, I'm not doing this. You don't have access to me in this way. And then you keep doing it. You keep doing it. And then the one time you give them access to you in that way, they're like, oh, well, I can just continue just disrespecting your boundaries. And it's hard to navigate that. And I'm always like talking about that in like similar ways that you do. And especially when you talk about how you do an intake, I was like, very similar for myself, of being like, okay, let's talk about these things. And therapy should be collaborative. There's just so many benefits to therapy, as I'm saying all those things.
With the boundaries, the language that I often use is establish and maintain. So you verbalize this, but how are you, as you say, being consistent in your maintenance of that boundary? Because you're right, when you're not firm, that presents a potential opportunity for someone to test your boundary, and they will.
Absolutely, they will. Yeah. Whew, the stories I got for that. I was like, I feel attacked. Like there's like, I'll just show you. This is me.
I love it. I love it.
There's a lot of stuff I had to say.
I love it.
I'm all in the margins. I'm like, do she know me? all in the margins. So I want to talk specifically about how your book is set up. So you have 5 sections. You have strength, intimacy, parenting, and vulnerability and healing. Because I'm an avid reader, I tend to read over 120 books a year. And I just love reading. It's like one of my joyous activities to do. I really loved how for each chapter you had a quote by a very, very like prolific, inspiring, wonderful, awesome Black woman. And I'm wondering like what was the reasoning behind it? And also if you've read the work of those specific Black women, it like perfectly ties in to
Yes.
the chapters after. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's giving. It's giving. So I'm like really excited about that. And I wanted to say something specifically about vulnerability, but I'll let you answer that question.
So you're asking about the reasoning. The reasoning is there are many historical, great, brilliant Black women minds that have thought deeply about strength, trauma of Black women
Mhm.
before this piece, that
Right.
have influenced me, that have influenced, the world's thinking about these concepts. And it was those quotes that resonated with me personally, even outside of this book, and my own reading and my own thinking about my own experience as a Black woman, and others that I know. And so I wanted to honor that, and I just wanted to honor their thought leadership in the space. Like we don't think about these things alone. This is I'm talking about the collective,
Yeah.
and they're the greats,
I mean,
so
you said it, I didn't. You said it.
they
I
are.
didn't.
Yeah, so that was the reason. That was the reason why.
Mhm. I feel like it is very something in Black communities and in our cultures where it is respectful to pay homage, right? Pay homage to who came before you. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I read it. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, perfect. I think it made it more special that I read the books, or
Mm-hmm.
seen things, and it just made it just much better.
To that point, I want to say that I didn't like uh, Google quotes. I mean, I too have read
Yeah.
the books. Those quotes were my highlights. My highlights transferred to my little notebook of special statements that have resonated with me. And
Mhm.
so I, you're acknowledging the importance of context, and having an appreciation of the context in which these statements were made, and I share that appreciation as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. Thank you for really being very thoughtful in the way that you organized the book. I wanted to talk about, so I hope I'm saying her name right. Intosake, is that
Mm-hmm.
how you
For
pronounce
Color
it?
Girls. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm like always pronouncing it wrong, notoriously pronouncing her name wrong. You start off with that in the vulnerability section. And then, there's even a section that says Black people don't commit suicide, or something like that was the name of the chapter. And I just found that's just an example of how I think that the preceding chapters of the header really fit well, was really done beautifully, in my opinion. Um, Also for parenting, you start I think it's a quote from Maya Angelou, I believe, at the beginning for parenting. And I was wondering, have you ever read, this is my favorite Maya Angelou book because I've read most of hers. Can you see that?
I see it. I have not read that. No,
I was like, did you read this too? Because
I
it
didn't read
felt
that.
like you did. It really felt like you did when you're talking about parenting. And there's like, I think a lot of times, even when you talked about your relationship with your mom, some things that I personally resonate with as well. I view this book as like one of the things that really helped me heal the relationship that I had with my mom. Because a lot of times, hindsight is 2020. Everyone says it, right? And there's just certain things that you are not privy to, back to quiet as it kept, that your
Mm-hmm.
mother don't let you in on. So
Mm-hmm.
you grow up thinking one way about her, and that these are her intentions. But you, as you said earlier, are not privy to the layers in which who she is. So
Mm-hmm.
this book really provided me with, oh no, I need to like understand, how did my mother become who she is today? And maybe that would help me make sense of the interactions that I have with her, and also work towards healing, which is also a header in your book. And I just wanted to read two things to you from this, that I think really goes with that healing. So I don't know if you know much about Maya Angelou and her life with her mom. How it was shaky.
Yes. It was, yes, indeed.
Shaky. You know, in the beginning, it wasn't. You know, it was on a chair with just two legs.
But also not one note. And that's something I can relate to
Right.
as well. There were, various aspects, and I think appreciating the intricacies of
Yeah.
what at surface is shaky.
Right.
There's the breadth of that as well. But go ahead.
No, exactly. So it just, reading about her relationship with her mom, that appears in several of her novels, right? It's a common theme in a lot of her books that she wrote. So it just, I don't know, I often cried reading the book that I have in my hand. So one of the things she said, her mom looked at her and said, "Baby, I've been thinking, and I am sure you are the greatest woman I ever met." And like that right
I've
there.
heard that. Yes.
And that's something my mom has said to me, like, "You are it, boo." You know. So and then another one was like when she was learning how to dance and invited her mom to, you know, watch her dance, her and her uncles and her other family members. And then her mom was just so prideful that her daughter was like dancing and invited the church ladies and everybody to come see her dance.
Gotta have aunties.
Right, gotta have aunties. And then her mother said, "Now you will see some of the world, and you will show the world what you are working with." And I was like, now that is just, there's just something about those two quotes that really resonated with me. And I'm wondering if that resonated with you in the parenting section of your book, or if you think about it like in hindsight.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. I appreciate you bringing up the mom and the role of the mom. This the journey of this book with my mom is probably one of the most special parts of it. Many of the things that I talk about in the book as it pertains to my mom's life and how some of her experiences were repeated with me and kind of shaped me were new learnings as I was going through the process of kind of discovery in the book, which really kind of reiterates this role of silence and not talking about things and not really seeing our moms or our parents as full people outside of the role of mom, and what relationship stuff they've experienced, what challenges they've experienced with their own mothers, what life disappointments they've experienced. And I really got to appreciate that in a new way through conversations I had with my mom in this book. To add on to that, I'm just like so grateful to her because this was my book. She didn't really sign up for this. You know what I mean? This was not her jam per se. But, she did it for me, like really as a gift, I think, she was like, it got to a point where she said, "Okay, I'm tired of your questions now. I'm tired of your questions. This is enough." But that, I had pushed the limit. I had pushed the limit with her.
Yeah.
Yes, I did think a lot about my mom because she's like all of us, a complex person. and that complexity was borne out in her parenting. Um, you know, her protectiveness contributed to her anxiety, which was also passed on to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so just using that as an example, like that's something I see in a lot of Black moms is this intense anxiety, this intense fear. That's love, that's protection, but it's also not healthy.
No, it feels smothering. I
It
felt that.
feels, it can feel smothering, it can instill fear.
Yeah.
Um, and going back to our conversation just a minute ago about boundaries, that's something that in my adulthood I have said, Mom, this is not healthy for me.
Setting boundaries as an adult is just, I do not recommend. No, I'm just kidding. I do recommend. It's just hard.
It's hard, but I have to say, after many times with it, like it starts to hit.
Yeah, that maintenance piece.
It's the maintenance. It starts to hit. And it's not, it's not, many of our moms mean well. Many of them mean well. And so it's the finding the language, which, as mental health professionals, we're equipped to do. Say, Mom, you're giving me anxiety. Please don't put that on me.
Right. Or I'm gonna head out. I'm gonna talk to you later.
I'm gonna talk to you later. I'm gonna talk to you later. I'm gonna go ahead and go now.
Right. I think somebody called me. Actually, my supervisor on the other line. I had to click on over here.
But she gets it now. It still takes reminding. She gets it now. Another thing that I will mention about the mom piece is understanding her relationship challenges and being kind of like mind blown when I saw that replicated in myself with no information, right? Like how does that even happen?
That you're just living and not even aware of it.
Right.
Yeah.
What if that conversation had happened as a teenager? How might that inform? Because I grew up in a house where we didn't talk about much of anything. Lots of stuff swept under the rug. Lots of stuff.
The is literally tattooed on everybody's neck.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, the role of mom. The other thing I'll say about that is that one of the pieces of comments that I've gotten about parenting and the role of mom is people have said that there's not enough said about really difficult, strained relationships between daughter and Black mom.
Yes.
And how the mom is generally in our community kind of revered and held up. And if you have a distant or absent relationship with your mom, that's really kind of taboo or not talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't get into that in the book, but I just want to mention that because I think that's an important acknowledgement as well.
I think that's a really important acknowledgement. I myself, I'm rocky. I'm just like shaky. I'm here with, Maya, as I said earlier. But it's like with me and my mother, it was very shaky in the beginning. Down to when I was born. And then it got more shaky. And then I started going to therapy. I think that's really what it stopped. Being so shaky for me is when I started saying, well, I'm here. But shout out to my grandmother, the matriarch of the family, who was like, I'm not dealing with you and your attitude, ma'am. I'm sending you to this white lady. You talk to her. She's like, I'm sending you to a therapist.
That's incredible.
Yeah, she did that after Katrina. She was like, no, I'm not dealing with this. I'm sending you to a therapist. And I think that was the best thing she could have ever done for me, is send me to a therapist. I also think that something I think that needs more light is that relationship between grandma, mom, and daughter. I don't see that always talking about like that intergenerational thing. And you definitely hint to it in your book. What I find more often now is like there's something in the air, and I don't want to put a name to it right now, but I would just say there's something in the air of the relationship of like similar to mine that I'm seeing with a lot of my friends. It's like I'm close to my grandma. Let me tell you, that lady, she can have the liver, a kidney, whatever she needs is hers, right? But my mom is like, how are you, friend? How are you talking to her? Because she done did 1,000 things that nobody ever talk about, right? Like no one ever talk about. But I acknowledge that, verbally tells my granny, I know what you did back in 84. You know, I think you should talk to my mom. And she's like, I gave it to Jesus. You know?
He made it all right.
He made it all right. That's it. God had it. I gave it to Jesus. I said, did he give it back? She goes, Bree, don't say that. I'm wondering if he gave it back to you, because I just feel like there's a little bit more that needs to be done. Like even in my written review that I wrote of your book, I said, this is like, if you are a woman of faith, right? If you're a Black woman of faith and you're trying to figure out if therapy is for you, this is a great book to start. Like, because not only are you saying, you know, you need to work on yourself and, you know, advocate for yourself and choose you, sis, but you can also go to Bible study and talk to your pastor. Right. Like that doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Like you can praise the Lord, but also engage in science and work on yourself, you know, because as Mark Wolin, he wrote a book called It Didn't Start With You. And he talks about how trauma is passed on, right? Generations to generation. And it's like, you need to work on the stuff that's in you that didn't really come from you, but got perpetuated inside of you through DNA sequences. You know, I don't know all the words for that, but I'm just saying those are things that need to be explored, and that it didn't start with you, sis. So starting with this book is that it's that great intersection, because there are lots of Black women who are God-fearing, right? Lots of Black women who are God-fearing and go to church and engage in sermon and really value the word of the Lord and the word of their pastors, right? So this is a very good book for that those type of experiences.
Yeah, a couple things on that. Similar to what you're describing with the grandmother, the mother, and the mother.
Yeah.
You know, there's certainly similar themes in my family between my grandmother, mother, and myself, whereby my grandmother and mother had their stuff.
Rocky.
And my grandmother jumped over that to dote everything onto me.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of kind of hypotheses I could make around that. And as I listened to my mom talk about a softening of her as she was, you know, aging and her health was failing and my mother was caring for her, and a realization of the role that kind of her toughness had played and the relationship, it was all that those moments I think were almost like a healing and acknowledgement of, and that was a moment of great vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right? My mother told me how my grandmother hated having people have to care for her, hated not being able to do for herself and having to rely upon other people. But that's there was no longer an option.
Yeah, when you're a strong Black woman and now you got to lend on other people.
Right. And there's no choice.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Maya talks about that in this book, by the way. Exactly that. So.
And the faith piece, I talk about, you know, one of my patients in the book who I affectionately call my church lady, devout in her faith, 3-4 times a week,
Mm-hmm.
churchgoer. And I saw her in therapy for 7 years.
Yeah.
And she said, I know God sent you here to help me. And the way that she was able to integrate scripture and therapeutic practice,
Mm-hmm.
I learned so much from, um, and
The gift of therapy, huh?
yeah, yes, yes. But I think you're absolutely right. There historically is a really strong resistance. I do believe there's a shift happening there. I've been invited into church spaces to talk about mental health. I have relationships with other faith leaders who are speaking about the importance of, mental health from, during sermons, which I think really kind of sets the stage and sets an example for people having permission to be able to do both. So I see some optimism there for sure.
Me too. I think it also really helps to see it, right? It's like things don't make sense until you see it. Sometimes, like with my dad, I don't think he ever would have believed in mental health unless I wasn't his daughter. If I'm being honest, like he would have been like, nah, that ain't for me. And my granny,
I
she's
think I could probably say the same, actually. I think I
right.
could say the same with my dad. Yeah.
Yeah, my dad's like, nah, it ain't it. Yeah, I'm not going to talk to them white folks. Like,
Right.
very adamant, like, no. But my granny, she has a therapist. So my granny
Wow.
definitely, yeah. So, I mean, my mom is like, nah. So it's just different relationships with them both and like navigating, like, realizing also that it's really hard to even say this, like to my mom, I am my grandmother's granddaughter. People be like, oh, I'm my mother's daughter. I feel it like mostly with my grandma, like the way
Mm-hmm.
she interact with the world. There's just different things she does in my daily life. I'm starting to realize the older I become, how much more like her than I,
Mm-hmm.
didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize before. Um, so that's been really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
navigating it. And I think, there needs to be more conversations around that, grandma, daughter, um,
Mm-hmm.
mother daughter relationship, because it,
Yeah, and the role of grandma came up naturally in the stories of many of the women in the book.
yep,
Um,
yep,
as primary caretaker, as unresolved trauma,
hmm,
unresolved mental health issues,
yeah,
the strain between grandma and mom that you're describing.
hmm. You even
Um,
talked about briefly I can't remember the chapter, but you were talking about slavery and the roles
mhm,
of people. And
mhm,
yeah,
mhm. Yeah,
absolutely. Um, so reading the text, I assume that you are also a woman of faith.
I am. Yes.
Okay. I hate that assumption. I was like, I'm thinking she's a woman of faith. And I wanted to talk to you of why that was so important that was in the text.
Well, um, I think that regardless of where individuals fall in terms of Black women fall in terms of their spiritual beliefs or religious orientation, that it's hard to ignore the role of faith and spirituality in the Black community
That is true.
and the messages that come with that, the way it shapes how we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do, even if you don't consider yourself religious or spiritual.
Hmm.
Many, if I dare say most of us, have been exposed to these messages through grandma, through ma, through aunties.
Hmm.
Certainly my grandmother, instilled in me the importance of faith. I describe my mother as kind of my first role model as a strong Black woman, a prototypical example of a strong Black woman. And when I think of a prototypical example of a strong Black woman, faith is often a part of that.
Yeah.
Reliance on God, reliance on your spiritual beliefs is often a part of that. And so kind of in this framing of, who is the strong Black woman and what is on the other side of the strong Black woman, I think faith is a key part of that. Mm-hmm. Included in that is, tensions that can show up in spirituality. Mm-hmm. When people lose their faith or are not as faithful as they should be, which comes up specifically as it pertains to getting help for mental health challenges.
Yeah.
Similarly I talk about my own anxiety, my own periods of depression, and I got many of the same messages from my mom, Yeah. My mom didn't she did dismiss mental health. She did.
Mine did too. Ain't no
I was trying to be a little gentler, but she did. Yeah. She didn't do it like in an overtly blatant way, but kind of like why do you need that? I don't understand.
My mama explicitly said, "Girl, ain't nothing wrong with you."
Right. Well, that too. Right. Yes. Verbatim, actually. Yes. You're fine. You're fine.
You'll be all right. Just go take a nap.
You take a nap. Lay down.
Lay down. You stressing about things. Are these people paying your bills?
Right.
I'm like,
that's good. That's so real. That just warmed my heart so much because lay down is definitely a mental health. I should add that one. There's a mental health practice from Black moms.
It is. I mean, there's this woman, I forget her name, but I keep trying to force people to go to her Instagram. And she created this thing called the Nap Ministry.
Nap Ministry, yes.
I'd be like, take
what if it was
nap.
Called Go Lay Down, yeah.
Go lay down. Sleep on it or something, knock it out. Because sometimes stuff just be above me now. Above me now, and I'm just like, here is the pillow. I keep it near my desk. I have a long little chair, and I just go ahead and head out for a couple hours, and
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's what we're taught. That's what we're taught in terms of how to deal with stuff. Pray about it.
Yeah.
And let it go.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say thank you for interviewing with me. And it's so refreshing to see a Black woman as a psychologist, because that's a goal of mine. I've definitely been shuffling my feet due to imposter syndrome, for sure. I will say more than anything else. So it's really good to see the representation. And I just want you to know that means so much to me, seeing it and knowing that it exists and it can happen. And wondering if
thank you for that, and your presence is needed.
Thank you. Hopefully I get this private practice going. I have everything. I'm like, girl, turn it in, turn the paperwork in. So that's kind of where we're at there. Those of you who are watching, on the replay or in wherever you're at watching it, I want to give you 3 recommendations to add to Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. 2 are put together by Tamara Winfrey Harris. The first one is that I'm showing you right now is called The Sisters Are All Right, Changing the Broken Narrative of Black Women in America. This is the 2nd edition. This is an ARC copy I got, but I think it really pairs with a lot of the things that you spoke about. Another book written by or collected by the same author is called Dear Black Girls. And I really love that format because each chapter is like dear mixed girl, dear immigrant Black girl, dear Black girl. It's just so many different intersectional identities that Black women are writing, like older Black women are writing to younger Black women. So I really like the way that book is set up. And again, Me and Mom by Maya Angelou, which I love so much. So those are my 3 recommendations I would pair with this book. And you also can read, It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin too, would actually give you that deeper context when we talk about intergenerational trauma and how it's translated and experienced in the body from generation to generation.
Thank you, Bree. Thank you for this conversation, your insight, your service. I've so enjoyed talking with you today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Me too. Do you have any advice, like an advice for someone that you would like to give out to Black women, other than advocate for yourself, which is, I'm sticking to that. I really love that.
Yeah. My advice is I encourage Black women to pay attention to what's showing up for you in your life. Hold space for that with compassion. Allow it to be without the judgment, without the shame, without the guilt, without the blame. Ask for what you need and set boundaries against what you don't. And allow yourself to receive.
That part.
Yeah. We're givers. That's one of our strengths. But we also have to ask and receive, be filled up. So that's what I leave our listeners with today.
All right. Well, thank you. And I will end the recording.